What if the genius behind Tesla, SpaceX, and countless other groundbreaking innovations suddenly found himself caught in a battle that could bring everything crashing down? What if all the achievements, all the years of relentless work, were suddenly threatened, not by a new rival or technological failure, but by something far more unexpected, a legal showdown? The courtroom doors swung open with a deafening slam. Elon Musk stepped in, his mind racing, but his face unreadable. Every camera flashed in his direction, capturing the man whose vision of the future had turned entire industries upside down. From electric cars to Mars missions, Musk had been the face of progress. Yet, as he walked past the rows of reporters, each person seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what would come next. The case was more than just another legal dispute, it was a battle for his empire. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, the Boring Company. They were more than just companies. They were Musk's legacy, his heart and soul. He had fought tooth and nail to build each of them from the ground up. And now, one unexpected lawsuit threatened to unravel it all. The legal papers had arrived like a thunderbolt, unexpected and sharp, sending shockwaves through his life. What was the true source of the attack? Musk had been no stranger to controversy. After all, he'd made headlines for everything from Twitter rants to rocket explosions. But this was different. This time, it wasn't a misstep in his personal life or a failed product. It was a calculated, corporate attack that aimed to strip him of his power, his wealth, and most importantly, his control. Musk had always known that power came with enemies, but this wasn't a typical rival trying to outpace him in the tech world. This was a legal battle that reached deep into the heart of everything he had worked for. For the first time, he wasn't fighting an external force, he was fighting something far more insidious. This fight was personal. The question hung in the air as the cameras flashed: how had it all gone so wrong? As Musk entered the courtroom, the weight of the world seemed to rest on his shoulders. For years, he had been the picture of success, the man who reshaped industries, defied conventions, and led humanity toward a future that many believed was impossible. Now, here he was, facing an existential threat from those who had once supported him, those who had once stood beside him in the trenches. The defense team had been preparing for weeks. Their strategy? To focus on the facts, to dismantle the claims with cold, hard logic. But Musk knew that it wasn't going to be enough. No amount of legal jargon or courtroom finesse would protect him from what lay ahead. This wasn't just about winning. It was about survival. Musk's mind raced as he took his seat, glancing briefly at the opposition. The plaintiffs were seated across the room, their faces impassive, their lawyers poised for battle. But what Musk saw wasn't just a legal team, it was a group of opportunists who had come for his empire. They had been waiting for this moment, watching his every move, preparing to strike at the perfect time. The clock was ticking. The stakes had never been higher. And the world was watching. The media frenzy surrounding the case had already begun. Headlines flashed across every news outlet: Elon Musk in legal battle of the century, tech mogul faces lawsuit that could end his reign, Musk's legacy at risk in courtroom showdown. Each headline was a reminder of how high the stakes had become. Musk wasn't just fighting for money or a company. He was fighting for everything he had built, everything he had dreamed of, and everything he believed in. As the judge called the court to order, Musk took a deep breath. This wasn't the kind of battle he was used to. He was used to launching rockets, creating revolutionary electric cars, and disrupting industries. But now, the battle was in the courtroom. And for the first time in his life, the outcome wasn't just about vision or strategy. It was about survival. His mind flashed back to his early days, when he had nothing but an idea and a burning desire to change the world. He had been underestimated by everyone, by his classmates, by investors, by the world at large. But he had never let that stop him. He had pushed forward, relentlessly. And now, as he sat in this courtroom, he realized that this was no different. The first round of the legal battle had begun, and Musk was ready. Or at least, he thought he was. What happened? How did it all come to this? It was a question that Musk had been asking himself ever since the lawsuit was filed. He had been blindsided. He had thought his relationships with his business partners were solid, his financial dealings above board. So, how had this happened? It wasn't just the lawsuit itself that had rattled him, it was the secrecy surrounding it. The plaintiffs had moved with precision, using their connections and influence to orchestrate an attack that Musk hadn't seen coming. For someone who prided himself on being ahead of the curve, this was a devastating blow. For the first time in years, Musk was forced to confront the reality that not everyone saw him as the hero of the story. Not everyone believed in his vision. Some people wanted to tear him down. And now, they were coming after him with everything they had. His legal team was scrambling, preparing their arguments, but it wasn't just a battle of lawyers and facts. This was a war for Musk's future. He couldn't afford to lose. As the courtroom drama unfolded, Musk's mind wandered for a moment. He thought about his family, his children. What kind of world would they inherit if he lost everything? What kind of legacy would he leave behind if his empire crumbled in the face of this attack? It was a thought that gnawed at him, but Musk wasn't one to back down. He had always faced adversity head-on. From his childhood in South Africa to his early days as a struggling entrepreneur, Musk had never let the odds discourage him. This was just another challenge, one he was determined to face with the same resilience that had carried him through so many other battles. But this time, the stakes were different. As the first day of the trial came to a close, Musk walked out of the courtroom, flanked by his team. The reporters were already clamoring for a statement, but Musk remained silent. He didn't need to say a word. His presence spoke volumes. He wasn't going anywhere. The battle had only just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk was never supposed to be here. No one believed in him, at least, not at first. His journey was one of persistence, resilience, and defiance of all odds. From the early days in South Africa, Musk's life had been a constant struggle to prove himself, both to others and to himself. Yet, no matter how many times the world tried to knock him down, he always found a way to rise. Musk was born in Pretoria, South Africa, on June 28, 1971. His childhood was far from easy. His parents divorced when he was young, and he often found himself in a battle between two worlds, the cold, scientific mind of his father, Elon Musk, and the warm, nurturing presence of his mother, May Musk, a model and dietitian. His father, a self-proclaimed genius, had a complex relationship with Elon. The younger Musk had an insatiable curiosity for technology and innovation, a trait he inherited from his father, but their relationship was often strained. His father could be cold, critical, and distant, a far cry from the nurturing influence Elon craved. On the other hand, May Musk was a pillar of strength and support. While Errol pushed him to be great in ways that often felt more like pressure than guidance, May's love was a constant anchor in his life. She would always tell him to never give up on his dreams. Her belief in him was unshakable, and that belief would become the foundation of his future success. Elon's childhood was filled with books, a deep sense of loneliness, and an overwhelming drive to learn. He devoured science fiction novels, and at a young age, he became fascinated with computers and technology. When he was just 10 years old, he bought his first computer and taught himself how to code. By 12, he had created and sold a video game called Blaster, a simple space shooter that earned him a small amount of money, his first taste of entrepreneurship. It wasn't much, but to Elon, it was proof that he could build something from nothing. But his school years were far from easy. Musk wasn't a typical kid. He didn't fit in with his peers, who found his intellectual interests strange and intimidating. His awkwardness, combined with his relentless drive, made him a target for bullying. He was pushed around, teased, and often isolated. Those years were tough, and Musk would later describe his childhood as lonely. He wasn't interested in sports, and he couldn't care less about the social games his classmates played. He was consumed by his vision of the future, a future that, at the time, seemed far beyond anything his classmates could comprehend. In his teenage years, Musk became more determined than ever. He moved to Canada to attend Queen's University at the age of 17, escaping the pressures and expectations of South Africa. He would later transfer to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned degrees in both physics and economics. Even then, Musk had already set his sights on something bigger. He didn't just want to be successful, he wanted to change the world. But what drove him to go after such ambitious goals? Why did he seem so willing to sacrifice everything, his friendships, his personal life, even his health, just to chase his dreams? The answer wasn't simple. Musk wasn't just motivated by the prospect of wealth or fame. In fact, he often said he didn't care about money. What mattered to him was the future. He had a singular vision, to make humanity multiplanetary and to revolutionize the way people lived on Earth. In the late 1990s, he moved to Silicon Valley, where his ambitions took shape. He co-founded Zip2, a software company designed to help newspapers create an online presence. The company was a success, and in 1999, Compaq acquired it for nearly $300 million. But for Musk, this was just the beginning. He used his newfound wealth to fund the next stage of his journey, X.com, an online payment company that would later become PayPal. Once again, he was ahead of the curve, pioneering an entirely new way for people to exchange money online. PayPal was eventually sold to eBay for $1.5 billion in stock, cementing Musk as a rising star in the tech world. However, success was not without its struggles. Musk had a reputation for being difficult to work with. His perfectionism, often bordering on obsession, made him a tough leader to follow. He was demanding, sometimes volatile, and completely unwilling to settle for anything less than the best. His drive alienated many of his colleagues, and at times, even his closest friends. Musk wasn't just creating businesses, he was changing industries, and the pressure to do so was enormous. But the real turning point in Musk's life came when he founded SpaceX in 2002. Musk's dream of space travel wasn't just about pushing the boundaries of technology, it was about ensuring the survival of the human race. He believed that humanity had to become a multiplanetary species to survive the long-term challenges facing Earth. And so, with little more than a passion for space and a burning desire to succeed, Musk set out to create a private space exploration company. At the time, many thought he was crazy. Private companies had no business launching rockets. The space industry was dominated by government agencies, and Musk, with no formal aerospace experience, had no right to challenge the status quo. Yet, he persisted. The first 3 rockets SpaceX launched failed spectacularly, costing Musk millions of dollars. He was on the brink of bankruptcy, but he never gave up. And in 2008, SpaceX achieved its first successful launch, proving the world wrong. Shortly after, Musk turned his attention to electric cars, founding Tesla Motors in 2003. Tesla, like SpaceX, faced an uphill battle. The automotive industry was entrenched, and the idea of electric cars being viable for the masses seemed almost laughable. Yet, Musk poured every dollar he had into the company, betting that electric vehicles were the future. The Tesla Roadster, introduced in 2008, changed the game. It was a high-performance, luxury electric car that could go toe-to-toe with gas-powered sports cars, and Musk wasn't done yet. As the years went on, Musk's vision continued to evolve. He founded other ventures like Solar City, aimed at promoting sustainable energy, and The Boring Company, designed to address urban traffic issues. Musk's ambitions seemed limitless, and with each new venture, he expanded the scope of what was possible. His name became synonymous with innovation, and the world watched in awe as he reshaped entire industries. But Musk's rise to the top wasn't without its challenges. His personal life suffered, particularly his relationships. His marriages ended in divorce, and his connection with his children was often strained due to his obsessive work habits. His professional life was a whirlwind of successes and failures, but through it all, Musk remained focused on his ultimate goal, to change the world. Despite everything, one thing was certain: Elon Musk was a man driven by a relentless vision of the future. A man who had fought tooth and nail to build an empire that would change the course of human history. And yet, as his empire grew, so did the enemies who sought to tear it down. As Musk sat in the courtroom that day, the weight of his past was heavy on his shoulders. He had come so far, and now, his future was at risk. The legal battle ahead would be one of the greatest tests of his life. But if there was one thing Elon Musk had learned in all his years of adversity, it was this: he didn't back down. He fought. Always. The courtroom was heavy with tension as Elon Musk sat silently, his hands folded in front of him. The plaintiff's legal team had just finished presenting their case, and Musk's defense team was already preparing their counterarguments. The air felt thick, like the calm before a storm, and every word spoken in this room carried the weight of not only Musk's future but the future of the companies he had built from the ground up. The case that had brought Musk to this point was more than just a simple business dispute. It was a high-stakes fight, one that could unravel everything he had worked for. The plaintiffs weren't just former partners or disgruntled employees, they were powerful forces with vast resources, connections, and their own interests in the outcome of this case. They had carefully orchestrated their attack, knowing that Musk's greatest asset wasn't just his wealth or his companies, but his reputation. And it was his reputation that was under siege now. Musk had always prided himself on being an innovator, someone who could take on the impossible and win. He had done it time and again with Tesla, SpaceX, and every other project he touched. But this time, he wasn't facing the usual industry rivals or investors who were after a piece of his fortune. This time, the battle was much more insidious. It was a battle for his very identity, and his enemies were using every tool at their disposal to tear him down. The first blow had come in the form of a lawsuit filed by a former Tesla board member, who accused Musk of mismanagement and fraud. The allegations were serious. The plaintiffs claimed that Musk had manipulated financial reports, misled investors, and engaged in activities that threatened Tesla's survival. If they could prove even one of these claims, it could spell the end for Musk and his electric car empire. Musk sat stone-faced as the plaintiff's attorney, a sharp-dressed man with a cold, calculating look, laid out the details. Each accusation felt like a sharp jab, piercing through the public image Musk had so carefully cultivated over the years. The attorney claimed that Musk's erratic behavior on social media, particularly his infamous tweets, had caused Tesla's stock to skyrocket and then plummet, damaging the company's credibility. They even pointed to Musk's Tesla Model 3 production issues as evidence of his failure to manage the company properly. As the defense team began to mount their response, Musk's mind raced. Every point made by the plaintiffs felt like a personal attack. But he knew he couldn't afford to react impulsively. He had to stay calm, focused. The courtroom was full of people who would scrutinize every move he made, every word he spoke. Elon Musk is a visionary, the lead defense attorney, a seasoned litigator named Jennifer Hayes, began. But like many great visionaries, he has a tendency to take risks. Some of those risks have paid off, and others haven't. But none of them constitute fraud. None of them constitute mismanagement. This is not a case about criminal behavior, it's a case about a difference of vision. Musk nodded, grateful for her calm and steady presence. He had hired Hayes because she was one of the best, but he knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. The plaintiffs had their claws deep into the case, and they weren't going to let go. As Hayes continued to argue that Musk's leadership had been integral to Tesla's success, Musk couldn't help but feel the weight of the words. Tesla had revolutionized the automotive industry, but it hadn't come without sacrifice. Musk had driven himself, and his employees, relentlessly to meet the goals he set. The long hours, the endless pressure, the sleepless nights. But it had all been worth it, he believed. Tesla was not just a company, it was a movement. It represented the future of sustainable energy, the promise of a world where electric cars were the norm, not the exception. Yet, even as he fought to defend Tesla's legacy, Musk couldn't ignore the doubts creeping into his mind. Could he have done things differently? Had he pushed too hard, too fast? The allegations were starting to take a toll on him, and he could see the cracks forming in the once unshakable foundation of his empire. The plaintiffs had other arguments, too, arguments that stung in ways Musk hadn't anticipated. One of the key points was his involvement in the management of SpaceX while still leading Tesla. The plaintiffs claimed that Musk's divided attention had caused both companies to suffer. He had spread himself too thin, and his inability to delegate effectively had put the future of both SpaceX and Tesla in jeopardy. But Musk knew the truth. He wasn't just managing these companies, he was building them. He was pushing them forward, sometimes at the cost of everything else. He had always believed that if you weren't willing to sacrifice everything for your vision, you didn't truly believe in it. It was a philosophy that had worked for him, but now, it felt like it might be the thing that brought him down. The courtroom drama escalated throughout the day, each side presenting their evidence, each witness adding fuel to the fire. But it wasn't just the legal arguments that were weighing on Musk's mind. It was the media coverage. Every day, new headlines emerged, each one adding more pressure, more scrutiny to his already fragile position. The public, once enamored with his bold ideas and unrelenting drive, now seemed to turn on him. The press, which had once hailed him as a genius, now painted him as a reckless billionaire who had gambled with the lives of his employees and the future of his companies. Was it true? Musk wondered. Had he been reckless? Had his impulsiveness, his drive, his obsession with success, led him down a path that he couldn't undo? He thought about his family. His children, especially. What would this legal battle mean for them? How would they see him? He had already sacrificed so much of his personal life for his companies. Could he afford to lose everything now? As the day came to a close, Musk retreated to his private office in the back of the courthouse. The world felt suffocating. His defense team continued to prepare for the next day's arguments, but Musk needed time to think. The weight of the battle ahead was becoming more real with each passing moment. He stared out the window, lost in thought. He had built his empire from nothing. He had gone to battle time and again, and he had always emerged victorious. But this time, it was different. This wasn't about just winning. This was about survival. He wasn't going to let it all slip away, not without a fight. The days blurred together as Elon Musk's legal battle raged on. Every moment felt like a relentless tug-of-war between his past accomplishments and the accusations threatening to bring everything crashing down. The courtroom was where the fate of his empire would be decided, but outside, the world seemed to be watching, waiting for a misstep. The media outlets were filled with stories of his trial, each one casting a shadow over his name. Musk could feel the walls closing in, yet somehow, he remained driven. It wasn't the first time he had been on the brink of collapse. He had been here before, when SpaceX nearly went bankrupt after 3 failed rocket launches, when Tesla teetered on the edge of oblivion during the production hell of the Model 3. But those were different battles. This time, the fight was personal. This time, it was about everything he had worked for, the future he had dreamed of, the vision he had relentlessly pursued for decades. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, Musk sat alone in his hotel room, staring at a blank screen. The weight of the trial had taken its toll. He hadn't slept in days, his mind consumed by the pressure of defending his life's work. Every decision, every tweet, every move seemed to be scrutinized under a microscope, and it was getting harder to breathe. It was as though he was caught in a cyclone, spinning, lost, yet unable to escape. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX and one of his most trusted allies. "We need you in the launch control room tomorrow. Falcon Heavy's next mission is critical." Musk's heart skipped a beat. Falcon Heavy. SpaceX's flagship project. The mission was monumental, one of the most ambitious launches in the company's history. And it couldn't happen without him. Despite the legal battle, despite the media frenzy, SpaceX couldn't afford to fail. Musk had promised the world that the future of space travel was not just a dream, it was within reach. He closed his eyes for a moment. His entire life had led to this point. The legal battle was just another challenge, but Falcon Heavy was the real test. The culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and perseverance. It wasn't just a rocket. It was a statement, a message to the world that no matter what the skeptics said, SpaceX was here to stay. The next morning, Musk stood in the launch control room at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The air was thick with anticipation. Engineers and technicians moved around him, preparing for the launch. He felt a quiet sense of calm wash over him. In this moment, he wasn't a defendant in a courtroom. He wasn't a target of media scrutiny. He was an engineer, a visionary, standing at the precipice of something monumental. "Everything's ready, Elon," Shotwell said, her voice steady as ever. Musk nodded, but his eyes were locked on the massive rocket poised on the launch pad. The Falcon Heavy was about to carry a payload that would demonstrate SpaceX's capabilities to the world, and it was Musk's dream on the line. If this mission succeeded, it would propel SpaceX even further into the future. But if it failed, the fallout would be catastrophic. The stakes were higher than ever. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. The words echoed through the room, and Musk's mind raced back to the early days of SpaceX, back to the moment when he had poured his life savings into the company, when failure seemed inevitable. He had risked everything, not just for a business, but for the future. He had believed that space exploration was humanity's next great frontier. He still believed it. 3, 2, 1. A deafening roar filled the air as Falcon Heavy's engines ignited, sending the massive rocket soaring into the sky. Musk stood there, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched as the rocket ascended into the heavens, a trail of fire and smoke blazing behind it. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Then, the first stage booster separated from the main rocket. The crowd in the control room erupted in applause. SpaceX had done it again. Another milestone had been reached. Falcon Heavy was on its way to proving that the private sector could not only match but exceed the capabilities of government-run space agencies. Musk allowed himself a rare moment of triumph. The legal battles, the media circus, the pressure, they all seemed to fade into the background as he watched the rocket climb higher into the sky. But deep down, he knew this victory wasn't just about space. It was about more than just rockets or electric cars. It was about proving something to himself and to the world, that no matter how hard the road was, no matter how impossible the odds seemed, he would always find a way. As the mission continued, Musk made his way back to his office at Tesla. There, the weight of the trial once again crashed down on him. He was still facing the courtroom, still fighting for his future. The battle with the plaintiffs was far from over, and the accusations continued to mount. But he had learned something from the rocket launch, something that gave him the strength to keep going. It wasn't about the immediate victory. It wasn't about the courtroom or the media. It was about the long game. It was about pushing forward, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Musk had spent his entire life defying expectations, breaking barriers, and proving the impossible was possible. This legal battle was just another hurdle, one that he would overcome, just like every challenge before it. The days that followed were a blur of court appearances, strategic meetings, and tense negotiations. But Musk's resolve had solidified. No matter what happened in that courtroom, he would keep pushing. The mission was far from over, and he had no intention of letting anything stop him. He had been to the edge of failure before, and he had always returned stronger. This time would be no different. As the trial dragged on, Musk's legal team mounted a powerful defense. Jennifer Hayes, the head of his defense, worked tirelessly to dismantle the plaintiff's case, poking holes in their arguments and exposing the weaknesses in their accusations. Musk remained an active participant, offering insights and direction, but he also knew that there were limits to what even he could do. The outcome was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he would not be going down without a fight. As the days turned into weeks, Musk kept his focus on the bigger picture. The SpaceX mission had proven to him something invaluable: the only thing that truly mattered was the future. The world could say whatever it wanted, but his vision would endure. And with each passing day, the legal battle seemed a little less important. The climax was coming, and Musk knew the world was watching. The courtroom was still. The kind of stillness that hung in the air like a thick fog, making it hard to breathe. It was the kind of silence that only precedes something monumental. Elon Musk sat at the defense table, feeling the weight of every eye in the room upon him. His legal team had just finished their closing arguments, but the tension had reached a boiling point. The air was electric with anticipation, and even the smallest movement felt like a ripple in an ocean ready to crash. Musk had been through so much in his life, but this moment felt different. His mind wandered back to the early days, the days when he had first dreamed of revolutionizing space travel, when he had first envisioned a future where electric cars weren't just an idea, but a norm. In those days, failure had been an ever-present shadow, and yet he had fought through it, believing that the impossible was possible. But now, facing these legal charges, the stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't just his companies on the line. It wasn't just his reputation. His entire legacy, the story of a man who had started with nothing and built an empire that could change the world, was at risk of being torn apart. The jury was about to deliberate, and Musk couldn't shake the thought that everything he had worked for might crumble in the coming hours. Despite the defense's arguments, the case against him had seemed to gain more momentum with every passing day. The plaintiffs had painted a picture of reckless leadership, of a man whose ambitions had blinded him to the realities of his own company. They had portrayed him as a liar, a manipulator, a man who had exploited the very people who had trusted him. The prosecution had tried to make the case that Musk's public persona, his frequent tweets, his brash behavior, his unwillingness to conform to the norms of corporate America, had contributed to a toxic environment at Tesla. They had cited the volatility of the stock, the never-ending drama, and the chaos that seemed to follow him wherever he went. The accusations felt like daggers, each one targeting a different part of his character. And despite his best efforts to stay calm, the truth was undeniable: these attacks were starting to take a toll. As the jury left to deliberate, Musk sat in his chair, his mind racing. He thought about his family, his children, who were too young to understand the full extent of what was happening, but who could still feel the weight of the situation. He thought about his team at SpaceX, the engineers and astronauts who had worked tirelessly to make his vision a reality. And, most of all, he thought about Tesla, the company he had risked everything to build, the company that had been his life's work. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Gwynne Shotwell. "Elon, we're counting on you. Don't let this trial define you." The words hit harder than expected. Gwynne had always been his rock, the one person who could remind him why he started this journey in the first place. Don't let this trial define you. She was right. The trial, the media circus, the accusations, none of it mattered in the grand scheme of things. He had always believed in the future, in the power of innovation and progress. That was what had gotten him this far. And that was what would carry him through this. The clock ticked on. Hours passed. And then, finally, the jury returned. The courtroom, which had felt suffocating just moments before, suddenly felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. The judge motioned for everyone to stand. "Elon Musk," the judge began, his voice somber, "you stand accused of serious charges. The jury has deliberated and reached a verdict." Musk's heart was in his throat. This was it. This was the moment that would define the next chapter of his life. The judge paused for a moment, looking at the jury foreman, who stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of mismanagement, the jury finds the defendant not guilty. Musk let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. Not guilty. A wave of relief washed over him, but it was only temporary. There were more charges to come. On the charge of fraud, the jury finds the defendant not guilty. Again, Musk exhaled. 2 charges down. But there was still one more. The judge glanced down at his papers, and the courtroom fell silent once again. On the charge of reckless endangerment of Tesla's financial future, the jury finds the defendant. The pause was excruciating. It felt like time was suspended in the air, as if everything Musk had worked for was hanging by a thread. Guilty. The word hit him like a punch to the gut. Guilty. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. For a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning. The room blurred, and Musk felt the weight of the word pressed down on him. The jury had found him guilty on one charge, the charge of reckless endangerment of Tesla's financial future. It was a blow, a gut-wrenching one, but it was not the end. He wasn't going to give up, not now. The judge's voice came again, pulling him back to reality. Elon Musk, you are hereby ordered to pay a fine of $10 million. However, due to your contribution to technological advancement and the future of sustainable energy, this court recommends that this fine be reduced in light of your accomplishments. The fine was a slap, but Musk wasn't concerned about money. It was the stigma, the label of reckless, that would follow him for the rest of his career. His name, his identity, had been tarnished in a way that could never be fully undone. As Musk stood and walked out of the courtroom, he could feel the weight of the judgment on his shoulders. The battle had taken everything from him, but it had also given him something unexpected, a renewed sense of purpose. This was just one chapter in his journey, and it wasn't over yet. Back at Tesla's headquarters, he met with his team. They had been watching from afar, anxiously awaiting the outcome. As he walked into the room, they stood and applauded. Their support was unwavering, even in the face of the legal storm. Elon, one of the engineers said, "This doesn't change anything. We're still moving forward." Musk smiled. Still moving forward. That was what mattered. The legal battle, the media firestorm, the personal attacks, it didn't matter. The future was waiting. And no matter what the world threw at him, Musk was determined to push ahead. There was still so much to do, so many more hurdles to jump, and so much more to achieve. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The days following the verdict were a blur. Elon Musk spent countless hours in meetings, focusing on the next steps for both Tesla and SpaceX, but his mind kept drifting back to the trial. The weight of being labeled reckless had been hard to shake off. He had always prided himself on his vision, his willingness to take risks for the greater good, but now that very quality was being scrutinized as a fault. Yet, despite the guilt on one charge, there was a sense of relief. The trial was over, finally. It was the quiet moments, the ones when he sat alone in his office late at night, that the full gravity of the situation hit him. He had spent his life pushing boundaries, but this battle had taken more from him than he had anticipated. The constant media coverage, the pressure of the trial, the hours of testimony, it had drained him. Yet, amidst all of this, something had become clear: his fight wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about something much bigger. Musk stared at his computer screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. His mind was running through possibilities, future goals, and the next great challenge. But it was hard to focus. His thoughts kept circling back to the words the jury had spoken. Reckless endangerment. The phrase haunted him, lingering like a shadow that wouldn't go away. Could he have done things differently? Could he have avoided the trial altogether? And if so, would it have been worth it? He shook his head. No. He couldn't dwell on the past. The world was changing fast, and the future was where his focus needed to be. The dream of interplanetary travel, of creating a sustainable energy future, of transforming humanity's relationship with technology, it was all still possible. One legal verdict wouldn't stop him. It never had before. Elon reached for his phone, his fingers dialing Gwynne Shotwell's number. He needed to talk to someone he trusted, someone who understood what this all meant, both the triumphs and the struggles. "Hey, Gwynne," Elon said when she picked up, his voice tired but determined. I've been thinking. I know, she replied. It's been a tough couple of weeks. Tough? You can say that again. But I've been reflecting on it all, everything that happened during the trial, everything I've fought for. And you know what? I realized something important. What's that? I'm not going to let this define me. I never have before, and I'm not about to start now. Gwyn was quiet for a moment, letting the words sink in. Good, she finally said. That's exactly what I want to hear. We've always known this road wasn't going to be easy. But you've always pushed forward, and I know you'll keep doing that. The mission hasn't changed. The mission. The one word that always brought Musk back to his true purpose. It was never about money or fame, it was always about the mission. Whether it was revolutionizing the auto industry with electric cars or changing the way humanity viewed space exploration, the mission was what drove him every single day. The trial, the media firestorm, the verdict, none of it mattered if the mission was still alive. Thanks, Gwyn, Musk said, a weight lifting off his chest. I needed to hear that. I know you did. Now, what's next? She asked. What's next? Musk repeated thoughtfully. Well, we keep pushing. We keep building the future. SpaceX is about to launch another crewed mission to the International Space Station, and Tesla's got new advancements in the pipeline. This isn't the time to slow down. He was right. There was no time to waste, no time to dwell in the past. The world was moving forward, and Musk had to keep up. There was a sense of clarity that came with the end of the trial. Despite everything, despite the trial's toll, his passion for innovation was as strong as ever. It wasn't just about the next rocket launch or the next car model, it was about changing the world in a way that no one thought possible. Over the next few weeks, Musk threw himself back into work. The legal case had been a setback, but it had also been a lesson. A reminder of the importance of transparency, of communication, and of being accountable for his actions. He'd always pushed boundaries, but he knew now that pushing too far without thinking through the consequences could have dire effects. The fine, the reputational damage, it was a price he would have to pay. But the mission was still alive, and that was all that mattered. As he sat in the boardroom with his team, discussing the next big projects for Tesla and SpaceX, he could see their excitement mirrored in his own. They had weathered the storm with him. The people who had stood by him, who believed in the vision, were still with him. And as long as they were, he knew that they would continue to achieve the impossible. All right, team, Musk said, standing up from the table. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. But remember, the future is ours to create. Let's make it count. As the meeting ended and people filed out, Musk lingered for a moment. The weight of the trial had lifted, but it had taught him something vital. Every setback, every failure, every trial he faced was part of the larger journey. He was not defined by his mistakes, nor by the opinions of the media. He was defined by his vision, by his refusal to accept the world as it was, and by his unwavering belief that the future could be better. He stood up, walking toward the window of his office. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the horizon. The future was out there, waiting for him, waiting for all of them. And despite the legal battles, despite the challenges, it was a future he would build. The world might not understand his path, but that was never the point. He wasn't building for the present. He was building for the future. He turned back to his desk, his mind already racing with ideas. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it never had been. And Elon Musk wasn't someone who would stop fighting now. The days following the verdict were both a blur and a strange form of clarity. Elon Musk had grown used to the constant roller coaster of success, criticism, and innovation, but this trial had been different. The courtrooms, the media frenzy, the relentless pressure, it all felt like a dark cloud that had settled over him for weeks. But with the verdict behind him, it was time to move forward. The first step was recovery, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. It wasn't just Musk who needed to recover. Tesla, SpaceX, and even his personal relationships had been affected by the trial. The media had painted him as a villain, a reckless genius whose ambitions had led him down a dangerous path. His legal battle had taken a toll on the people closest to him, his family, his employees, and his partners. Elon knew he couldn't let the shadows of the past linger. He needed to be strong, for himself, and for the people who believed in him. The journey to recovery, though, wasn't going to be easy. There was no magic solution to instantly undo the damage, but he knew that each step forward would be part of a larger process. Musk decided the best way to heal was by immersing himself in work. But this time, he would do it with a different mindset, one that focused on unity, communication, and trust. It was time to rebuild not only his public image but also the internal dynamics of his companies. They needed to work together, not just as employees and employers, but as a family united by a common vision. The first step in this healing process came in the form of a meeting with key leaders at both Tesla and SpaceX. Sitting across from Gwynne Shotwell and other senior members of his team, Musk looked around the room and saw the faces of people who had stood by him, even when the world seemed to turn against him. These were the people who had helped him turn his impossible dreams into reality. Their loyalty was unwavering, and in that moment, Elon realized that this was his real strength. "Elon," Gwynne said, breaking the silence that had hung in the room, "I think it's time we have a serious conversation about what's next. Not just for Tesla and SpaceX, but for you. This trial, it's taken a lot out of you. But we've been through a lot together, and we need to make sure we're all on the same page moving forward." Musk nodded, his eyes tired but resolute. He had known this conversation was coming. Everyone had felt the strain. But what they didn't know was that this was his moment of reflection. The trial had been a humbling experience, one that showed him where he needed to change. He had always been the visionary, the dreamer, the one who pushed the limits. But now, he realized that leadership wasn't just about being the loudest voice in the room, it was about listening, communicating, and understanding the importance of collaboration. "I've been thinking a lot about how I lead," Musk began, his voice quieter than usual. "And I realize that I need to do better, not just with you, but with everyone who works with me. Tesla and SpaceX have always been about innovation, but I've learned that innovation isn't just about the products. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels heard and valued." Gwynne and the others exchanged knowing glances. They had all seen the shift in Musk over the past few weeks. It wasn't just the pressure of the trial that had affected him, it was the realization that leadership meant more than just vision, it meant responsibility. "We're with you, Elon," Gwynne said, her voice firm yet understanding. "And we know this isn't easy. But we all believe in you. We believe in this mission. And we're ready to move forward with you." The words settled into the room like a breath of fresh air. There was no denying that the trial had created a rift, but it had also created an opportunity for growth, for Musk and for those around him. The road ahead would require hard work and a commitment to rebuilding, but Elon knew that with his team, he could face whatever came next. Over the next few weeks, Musk continued to focus on his work, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He spent more time in the factory, talking to engineers and workers. He visited SpaceX launch sites, meeting with astronauts and mission planners. He even made time to check in with his family, making sure that his relationships were mended after the emotional strain of the trial. As he walked through the Tesla factory, Musk noticed something different. There was a sense of camaraderie in the air, a renewed energy that hadn't been there before. People were talking more, sharing ideas, collaborating in ways that Musk hadn't seen in a long time. The trial had been a test of endurance, but now, it seemed to have brought the team closer together. People were no longer just following orders, they were actively contributing to the vision. At SpaceX, the atmosphere was equally charged with optimism. Gwynne had been working closely with the leadership team to streamline operations and improve communication. The goal was simple, to make sure that SpaceX's missions remained on track and that their vision for interplanetary travel remained intact. Despite the legal distractions, SpaceX had continued to innovate, and the upcoming launch of a new Mars-bound rocket was a testament to that. Back at Tesla, the production lines were ramping up, and the company was poised to release its next-generation electric vehicles. Elon felt a sense of pride as he walked through the factory floor. The work was difficult, but the team was driven. The recent setbacks had only fueled their determination. It wasn't just about making cars, it was about changing the world. The road to recovery, Musk realized, was not just about rebuilding his own reputation. It was about building something bigger, a legacy that would last far beyond his personal success. The future of clean energy, the promise of space exploration, and the ability to revolutionize transportation, it was all within reach. But none of it would be possible without the support of the people who believed in the mission. The team at Tesla, SpaceX, and beyond, they were the true strength behind his vision. One evening, as Musk stood on the balcony of his home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he felt a sense of peace. The legal battles were behind him, and the future was in front of him. It wasn't just about pushing the boundaries of technology, it was about the people who helped make those boundaries possible. Musk had always believed in the impossible. But now, more than ever, he knew that it wasn't just about achieving the impossible. It was about doing it together. And as he looked toward the future, he realized that the most important part of his journey was not the challenges he had faced, but the people who had stood by him, the people who had helped him rise from the ashes. The air was thick with anticipation as the large crowd gathered outside the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The moment had finally arrived. Elon Musk was about to announce something that would alter the course of space exploration forever. For weeks, rumors had swirled, fueled by cryptic messages from SpaceX officials and the occasional Twitter post from Musk himself. What was the next big leap in the quest to make humanity a multiplanetary species? Inside the headquarters, Musk stood in front of a sleek white podium, his eyes focused on the crowd. He could feel the weight of the moment, but he had grown accustomed to the pressure. It wasn't just about unveiling a new project, this was the future of humanity. It was everything he had worked for, and every failure, every setback, had led to this point. The room fell silent, and Musk took a deep breath before speaking. "Thank you all for coming today," Musk began, his voice steady but filled with the excitement that was contagious. "Today marks the beginning of something truly remarkable. For decades, we've watched space exploration from Earth, dreaming of one day becoming an interplanetary species. But that day is closer than ever." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Musk continued. "In the next few years, we will be launching the first crewed mission to Mars. This is not just another mission. This is the first step in turning science fiction into science fact. It's the start of building a self-sustaining city on Mars, a second home for humanity." A wave of applause swept through the crowd, but Musk raised his hand to quiet them. "The mission won't be easy," he said, his tone shifting. "It will take everything we have. The challenges we'll face on Mars will be unlike anything we've ever encountered. But we believe in the mission. We believe in the future." Musk paused for a moment, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. "This is the next great adventure for humanity," he continued. "The Mars mission will be a testament to the power of innovation, collaboration, and the resilience of the human spirit. And we are committed to making it happen, together." The crowd erupted into applause, the sound reverberating off the walls. For a moment, Musk stood still, taking in the moment. This was the culmination of everything he had worked for. Despite the legal battles, the personal sacrifices, and the doubters, he had finally unveiled his vision for the future. It was a vision that went far beyond Tesla, beyond electric vehicles, and beyond space exploration. It was a vision of the future of humanity. In the days following the announcement, the media frenzy began again, but this time, the focus was entirely on the Mars mission. Musk's reputation, which had been battered by the trial, was once again on the rise. The world was captivated by the possibility of humans living on Mars. The excitement was palpable. Investors, engineers, scientists, and ordinary people alike all rallied around the idea of making life on Mars a reality. For the first time in years, Musk felt a sense of unity with the world. People were once again dreaming the same impossible dream. The team at SpaceX quickly got to work on the mission. The engineers, many of whom had been working on the Starship program for years, were now fully focused on preparing for the Mars mission. Every detail mattered: safety protocols, the spacecraft's design, the logistics of life on Mars, and the long-term sustainability of a Martian colony. It wasn't just about reaching Mars, it was about staying there and creating a new home for humanity. But for Musk, the excitement of the announcement didn't last long. He was already thinking about the next challenge. SpaceX had taken on something monumental, and he knew the pressure would only increase from here. There would be no shortage of setbacks. No mission to Mars had ever succeeded before. But that was what made it so thrilling: the unknown, the uncertainty, the chance to push humanity's limits. Elon sat in his office late one night, reviewing the mission plans on his screen. The numbers, the equations, the schedules, they were all there. But something still nagged at him. Something wasn't quite right. As the engineers and scientists worked tirelessly on the spacecraft design, Elon found himself increasingly worried about the next big challenge: the human element. The astronauts who would go to Mars wouldn't just be pioneers, they would be the test subjects for life on another planet. Their safety and well-being were paramount. There were so many unknowns. How would the human body react to prolonged exposure to space? How would they cope with the psychological toll of isolation? And what about the hazards of the Martian surface itself? He picked up the phone and dialed Gwynne Shotwell's number. "Gwynne," Elon began when she picked up, "we need to talk about the astronauts. I've been thinking a lot about their training and preparation. We can't afford to miss anything." Gwynne's voice was calm and steady, a reassuring contrast to Musk's intensity. "I agree. We're working on it. We've already started recruiting top candidates, but we'll need to ensure they have the mental and physical resilience to handle everything Mars throws at them." "I know, but I want to make sure we're going beyond the basics," Musk insisted. "These astronauts will be the first humans on Mars. They're not just explorers, they're part of our legacy. We need to give them everything they need to succeed, and more." Gwynne was quiet for a moment before responding. "You're right. This is bigger than any mission we've ever undertaken. But we'll make sure they're ready. We'll get the best people, the best training, and the best support." Elon nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Good. Let's make sure we leave no stone unturned. These astronauts will carry the weight of humanity's hopes and dreams with them." As he ended the call and turned back to the plans, Elon's thoughts drifted to the vast emptiness of space. He had always believed that humanity's future lay among the stars. But now, as he considered the enormity of the Mars mission, he realized just how fragile that future truly was. There was no going back. The mission would require everything they had, and the cost of failure would be immeasurable. But failure, he knew, was not an option. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. After the announcement of the Mars mission, SpaceX's headquarters became a hive of non-stop innovation, planning, and preparation. But despite the excitement and optimism, Elon Musk knew that one of the most critical components of the Mars mission lay beyond technology, rockets, and spacecraft. It was about the astronauts, their training, resilience, and ability to adapt to life on another planet. The team at SpaceX was meticulous in every detail. Engineers worked around the clock, fine-tuning the Starship design, and logistical teams coordinated with NASA to ensure the infrastructure on Mars could support a self-sustaining colony. But Musk's focus had shifted. He couldn't help but think about the human element, the men and women who would risk their lives to travel to a world no human had ever set foot on. They would be pioneers in the truest sense of the word. With that in mind, he called a special meeting at SpaceX's headquarters to lay out the plan for the astronaut training program. In the meeting room, Elon was joined by Gwynne Shotwell, the SpaceX leadership team, and a select group of experienced astronauts from NASA and other space organizations. As the meeting began, Musk immediately cut to the core of the issue. "We're not just training these astronauts to operate a spacecraft," Elon began, his voice serious. "We're training them to survive on Mars. Everything we know about space exploration up to this point has been about short-term missions. But this is different. This mission will require them to live, work, and thrive on an entirely new planet for months, maybe even years." There was an intensity in the room, and everyone understood the weight of what Musk was saying. To explore Mars was one thing. To live on Mars was a whole different beast. The challenges ahead were enormous. Elon paused for a moment, looking around the room at the faces of people who had seen the unimaginable come to life. Yet even they knew this would be a new frontier in human history. "We'll need to equip them with the tools to handle every possible scenario," he continued. "From radiation exposure to isolation, from habitat failure to the psychological toll of being so far from Earth. This won't just be about surviving Mars, it'll be about thriving there." Gwyn leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Elon, we're already designing the habitat modules for the mission. They'll be self-sustaining and will provide everything the astronauts need for basic survival. But you're right, the human aspect will be the hardest part. The psychological challenges, the loneliness, how can we prepare them for something that no one has ever truly experienced?" Elon thought for a moment before responding. "We'll need to simulate as much of the Martian environment as possible. It's not just about physical endurance, it's about mental toughness. We have to make sure they're not only prepared for the science and engineering challenges but for the emotional and social challenges of long-term space travel. We'll set up mock Martian environments, conduct isolation training, and bring in psychologists to help them handle the stress. It'll be the most grueling training anyone has ever gone through." A senior astronaut who had worked on previous NASA missions raised her hand, her face thoughtful. "But what about the unknowns? There are still so many things we don't know about how the human body will react to long-term space travel. The isolation, the effects of zero gravity, what if we encounter issues we haven't even considered yet?" Musk nodded, understanding the concern. "Exactly. And that's why we'll need to think beyond conventional training. These astronauts will have to be problem solvers, innovators in their own right. They'll need to be able to improvise, adapt, and even fail and learn from those failures. We can't predict every challenge they'll face, but we can prepare them to face whatever comes their way." The room was quiet for a moment as the weight of Musk's words settled in. This mission wasn't just about going to Mars, it was about surviving, building, and creating life on another planet. It was the beginning of humanity's next great chapter, and it rested on the shoulders of a small group of astronauts. Elon continued, "In addition to that, we'll simulate living conditions on Mars here on Earth. We'll create a habitat that mimics the Martian environment as closely as possible, complete with isolation training. The astronauts will live in these conditions for months to ensure they are mentally and physically prepared for the journey. They'll undergo extreme physical training, psychological testing, and everything in between." As he spoke, Musk couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. These astronauts were going to be the first people to step onto the surface of Mars. They would become legends, but they would also bear the weight of humanity's future. It wasn't just a job, it was a calling. He looked at the team in front of him. "This mission is bigger than all of us. It's about the survival of humanity. The astronauts we select must not only have the skills but the fortitude to push through every obstacle. They must be a team, not just individuals. Because when they get to Mars, they'll have to rely on each other for everything." In the months that followed, SpaceX's Mars Mission Training Center was built, located in a remote area in the Arizona desert. The center housed a state-of-the-art simulation of a Martian habitat, designed to recreate the physical and emotional challenges of living on Mars. The crew would spend weeks in isolation, performing daily tasks like growing food, conducting experiments, and repairing equipment, all while dealing with the psychological strains of being cut off from Earth. The astronauts underwent a rigorous regimen. Every day was a challenge, training in extreme environments, working in low-gravity simulators, and enduring long periods of isolation. There were moments of doubt. There were moments when the isolation weighed too heavily, and some of the candidates struggled to maintain their mental composure. But Musk's belief in their resilience kept them going. He visited the center frequently, checking in on the progress and offering his own insights into the challenges they would face. The most difficult part of the training, however, was the psychological toll. The crew members had to adjust to the constant pressure of knowing that they were about to leave Earth forever. They would be the first humans to travel to Mars, and it was impossible to predict exactly what would happen when they arrived. The isolation was intense, weeks of being cut off from their families and friends. It was a weight that none of them had anticipated. Yet, as the months went on, the crew began to grow stronger. They learned how to trust each other, how to communicate, and how to rely on their training. The isolation became less about survival and more about collaboration. Musk's vision of a team working together to build a future on Mars was slowly taking shape in those desert simulations. As the training neared its end, Musk stood at the edge of the training center, watching the astronauts emerge from their final isolation simulation. They were battered, physically and emotionally drained, but they were ready. He could see it in their eyes. They were no longer just candidates for the mission, they were pioneers. And when they finally boarded that starship, they would be ready to make history. Elon smiled to himself. The road to Mars was long, but this was the final piece of the puzzle. The countdown had begun. The world was watching, captivated by the unfolding drama of the first crewed mission to Mars. SpaceX had managed to push the boundaries of space travel, from reusable rockets to the creation of a massive spacecraft designed to carry humans to the Red Planet. But nothing was as intense as the final few months before launch. Elon Musk sat in his office at SpaceX's headquarters, overlooking the busy campus below. Engineers rushed through the hallways, checking final designs, confirming flight paths, and ensuring everything was in place. Every detail, every tiny element of the spacecraft, was scrutinized under the microscope of perfection. Elon was surrounded by the sound of chaos, yet he felt a strange calmness. This was it. Years of work, countless setbacks, triumphs, and losses had all led to this one moment, the mission to Mars. The astronauts, who had undergone months of grueling training, were preparing for their own final stretch. They were undergoing the last rounds of medical checks, ensuring that their physical and mental health were in optimal condition. They'd spent countless hours in simulators, preparing for the Martian terrain, the effects of low gravity, and the isolation of being so far from home. But now, the countdown to the unknown had truly begun. Elon walked out of his office and toward the hangar where the starship was being prepared. The massive rocket gleamed under the harsh lights, its sleek metallic exterior reflecting the tension in the air. It was a beautiful machine, yet its purpose was far greater than any technological achievement. It would carry the future of humanity. He walked past engineers and technicians, nodding at them as they worked. Each one of them was focused, absorbed in their tasks. To them, this was just another day at the office. To Elon, it was the culmination of a dream that stretched back to his childhood. The dream of a human colony on Mars. Reaching the launch pad, Elon stood at the edge of the platform, looking out at the massive starship ready for launch. The vehicle that would carry the astronauts into the unknown was finally complete. The massive thrusters on the base of the rocket towered over him, casting long shadows in the bright afternoon sun. The ship would carry the astronauts away from Earth and into the vastness of space, on a journey that would change the course of history. His thoughts wandered to the crew: James, Natalie, Sophia, Liam, and Ethan. These 5 individuals would become legends. But the pressure on them was unimaginable. They would be the first humans to set foot on Mars, to breathe its thin atmosphere and walk its dusty surface. Elon couldn't help but wonder how they were feeling. Were they excited? Nervous? Afraid? He knew they had been training for this, but nothing could prepare them for the moment they would leave Earth behind forever. He had spent countless hours with them, making sure they understood the gravity of what was about to happen. But no amount of preparation could match the true experience of launching into space and leaving everything they knew behind. They would be the first to touch Mars, to make it their home, and Elon couldn't shake the feeling that everything they had learned, all the preparation, would be tested in ways no one could predict. The launch window was fast approaching, and the mission team had already started finalizing their plans. Everything had to go perfectly. There was no room for error. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. As the days passed, Elon continued his final checks. The excitement in the control rooms was palpable. The engineers had done their jobs, the astronauts were prepared, and the entire world was holding its breath. The challenge ahead was immense, but Musk's resolve had never been stronger. SpaceX launch control to Elon Musk, a voice crackled over the intercom. It was Gwynne Shotwell, his trusted right-hand woman and SpaceX's COO. "We're at T-48 hours. Everything looks good. The crew's pre-launch checks are completed. We're ready to go." Elon stood silently for a moment, absorbing her words. This was the moment. The moment everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of, would become real. The countdown was on, and there was no turning back. "I'll be right there," Elon replied, his voice calm but with a certain fire that only he could convey. He turned and made his way to the control room, the weight of the mission pressing down on him. But there was no fear in him. Only resolve. This was what he had been working toward his whole life. As he entered the control room, he was greeted by a mix of excited chatter and steady professionalism. Engineers, scientists, and support staff were all gathered around monitors, confirming final details and preparing for the most important launch in SpaceX's history. There was an air of anticipation in the room, and despite the monumental stakes, there was also a sense of pride. They had come so far, and now they were ready to make history. Elon approached Gwynne, who was standing next to a large screen displaying the countdown timer. "We're ready," Gwynne said, her voice steady. "Everything's in place. The crew is good to go. We've confirmed the launch trajectory. We've double-checked everything." Elon nodded. He had been through this process many times before with other launches, but this one felt different. This one was more than a launch. It was the future. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. The final preparations were underway. The astronauts were being loaded into the spacecraft, their faces visible through the viewing ports of the starship's cockpit. James, the commander of the mission, gave Elon a thumbs up as the crew was strapped into their seats. They were ready. "SpaceX launch control to crew," Gwynne said over the intercom. "You're clear for launch. All systems are green. We'll begin the final countdown in 5 minutes." Elon looked at the countdown clock. It was almost time. This was the moment the world had been waiting for. The moment they would see if all the hard work, the sacrifice, the innovation, would truly pay off. He took a deep breath. It wasn't just about the mission. It was about humanity's future. Mars wasn't just a dream anymore, it was a reality. And Elon Musk was about to send the first humans to make it their new home. The countdown began. T-10, 9, 8. Elon stood at the back of the control room, watching the final moments tick away. 5, 4, 3, 2. The ground rumbled beneath his feet as the starship's engines ignited, sending a plume of fire and smoke into the air. 1. Liftoff. The world watched as the spacecraft soared into the sky, cutting through the atmosphere. As the rocket disappeared into the clouds, Elon Musk allowed himself a small, quiet smile. They had done it. The journey to Mars had officially begun. What do you think it takes to make history? Is it just about the technology, or is it the vision and will to push forward even when the odds seem impossible? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The roar of the starship's engines echoed in the distance, its fiery trail painting the sky as it pierced through the atmosphere. Elon Musk stood in the control room, watching the spacecraft climb higher and higher, disappearing into the clouds, carrying with it the future of humanity. It was a moment of triumph, but also one of profound significance. There was no turning back now. The astronauts were on their way to Mars. As the rocket accelerated into the unknown, Elon allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The months of grueling preparation, the sleepless nights, and the countless setbacks, all of it had led to this. He had always known that the journey to Mars wouldn't be easy, but as the spacecraft passed through the final layers of Earth's atmosphere, it felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Still, this was only the beginning. The crew on board the Starship had their work cut out for them. The journey to Mars would take several months, and it would be anything but smooth sailing. They would face countless challenges along the way, from the isolation of space to the unknowns of long-term space travel. No one had ever made such a journey before, and there was no guarantee that they would succeed. But Elon had faith in them. He had seen the resilience, the determination, and the unwavering spirit of the astronauts during their training, and he knew that they were ready for whatever lay ahead. Back in the control room, the team was monitoring the spacecraft's trajectory, ensuring that everything was functioning as it should. The first few hours after launch were critical. The Starship's engines had to burn for several minutes to escape Earth's gravity, and it was during this time that any mechanical failure or human error could jeopardize the mission. But as the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room began to dissipate. The systems were functioning as expected. The rocket had cleared Earth's atmosphere and was now coasting in the vacuum of space. The astronauts were on their way to Mars. Elon turned to Gwynne Shotwell, his trusted right-hand woman. She had been with SpaceX from the beginning and had played a key role in getting the company to this point. He could see the same mix of excitement and concern on her face that he felt in his own heart. They had built something incredible, but there was still so much that could go wrong. "We've made it through the first stage," Elon said, his voice calm but serious. "Now it's just a waiting game. How's the crew holding up?" Gwynne checked her monitor. "They're all doing well. No major issues so far. The crew is settling into their routines. They're just getting used to the weightlessness of space. They're in good spirits." Elon nodded. It was a small relief, but it was a relief nonetheless. The psychological toll of being in space for such an extended period would be one of the biggest hurdles the astronauts would have to face. Long stretches of isolation, far from family and friends, in an environment that was both foreign and unforgiving. He couldn't imagine the emotional strain they would endure. But he had every confidence that they would rise to the occasion. After all, they had been selected for this mission because they were the best of the best. In the weeks that followed, Elon and the SpaceX team continued to monitor the crew's progress from Earth. The astronauts were busy with their daily tasks, maintaining the spacecraft, running experiments, and keeping their physical health in check. But as the days stretched into weeks, the reality of space travel began to set in. The astronauts were cut off from the rest of the world. Communication with Earth was delayed by several minutes, and while they could still receive messages from their families and the SpaceX team, they were no longer part of the daily rhythm of life back home. They had to learn to rely on each other completely. This was no longer just a mission, it was a test of their ability to endure the physical and psychological demands of being in space. James, the mission commander, had been chosen for his leadership skills. He was calm under pressure and had a natural ability to keep the team focused, even when things were at their most stressful. Natalie, the mission scientist, was an expert in astrobiology and had already begun conducting experiments to see how the human body would react to long-term space travel. Sophia, the engineer, was responsible for maintaining the spacecraft's systems, ensuring everything was running smoothly. Liam, the communications officer, had been tasked with managing communication between the crew and Earth, ensuring that updates were sent regularly. Ethan, the medical officer, was monitoring the health of the crew, keeping an eye on the psychological and physical effects of being in space. Life on the Starship was a far cry from the glamorous images of space travel that most people imagined. There were no breathtaking views of Earth as they floated through space, no moments of awe that would be captured by cameras. Instead, the crew spent their days in cramped quarters, working to ensure that the spacecraft remained operational and that they stayed in peak condition. It was a relentless routine, but it was the only way they could survive the journey. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult aspect of life aboard the starship. The astronauts were far from home, separated from their families, friends, and everything they knew. They were pioneers, but they were also alone in the vastness of space. The vast, empty void of space was a constant reminder of how far they had come, and how much farther they had to go. It was easy to feel small, insignificant, and overwhelmed by the enormity of what they were attempting to do. But even in the darkest moments, the crew found strength in each other. James, with his steady leadership, kept the team focused on the task at hand. Natalie, with her scientific curiosity, kept their minds occupied with experiments and data analysis. Sophia, ever the problem solver, was always looking for ways to improve the spacecraft's systems and make life on board more efficient. Liam, with his sense of humor, helped keep spirits high, even when things got tough. And Ethan, with his calm demeanor, helped the crew navigate the emotional toll of space travel. The days turned into weeks, and the crew settled into a rhythm. But as the weeks passed, there were moments of tension. The isolation was starting to take its toll. The astronauts were feeling the strain of being so far from home, and some of the crew members began to experience bouts of homesickness, fatigue, and doubt. But these moments were fleeting, and they quickly bounced back, drawing strength from one another. On the 45th day of the journey, something unexpected happened. The starship's sensors detected a strange anomaly in the spacecraft's propulsion system. It was a minor issue, but it was enough to raise alarms. Sophia, the engineer, immediately went to work, running diagnostics and trying to isolate the problem. It wasn't a catastrophic failure, but it was a reminder of how fragile their mission was. The crew worked together to troubleshoot the issue, with Sophia leading the charge. It was tense, but after several hours of testing and recalibrating, they managed to fix the problem. It was a small victory, but it reminded them of the importance of teamwork and their ability to overcome obstacles together. As the days continued to pass, the crew's bond grew stronger. They knew that the hardest part of the journey was still ahead of them. They were only halfway to Mars, and the psychological toll of being so far from home would only increase. But they were no longer just a group of individuals, they were a team, united by a common goal. The journey was far from over, but with every passing day, they were one step closer to Mars. As the days dragged on, the starship cruised through the endless darkness of space, inching closer to Mars. For the astronauts aboard, the isolation and monotony of deep space travel were starting to take their toll. The once vibrant excitement of the mission had begun to fade, replaced by fatigue and a quiet but growing anxiety. The long stretch of time with no direct contact with Earth, coupled with the challenges of living in such confined quarters, was beginning to weigh heavily on the crew. James, the commander, stood in the observation room, gazing at the flickering stars beyond the starship's thick windows. The silence was overwhelming. The other members of the crew had their own duties, but he often found himself retreating to this small room when the pressures of leadership became too much to bear. There was a sense of responsibility that hung over him. He was the one keeping the team together, ensuring they stayed focused. It was a heavy burden, especially with so much riding on their success. A soft knock on the door brought him back to reality. "Hey, James," Sophia said as she stepped into the room. "I think you should see this." He followed her to the control panel, where she had pulled up a set of images from the ship's external cameras. At first, he didn't understand what he was looking at. Then it hit him. "Is that Mars?" he asked, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "Yes," Sophia said, her voice tinged with excitement. "We're close enough now that the cameras are picking up the surface. It's faint, but that's Mars." James stepped closer to the screen. A faint red glow could be seen in the distance, a swirling mass of dust and rocky terrain. It was an image that felt almost too unreal to be true. They had been traveling toward this moment for months, and now it was finally here, the planet that had been the stuff of dreams, the goal that had driven them forward, was in sight. For a moment, there was a shared silence in the room. It wasn't just a distant dot anymore, it was real. Mars was no longer just a theory, a symbol of human achievement. It was tangible, something they were about to touch. They were going to land on that planet. James felt his chest tighten, his heart beating faster. This was the moment he had prepared for, the moment he had trained for, the moment that would define his life and the lives of everyone aboard the starship. "We're really going to make history, aren't we?" Sophia asked quietly, her voice full of awe. James nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, we are." The rest of the crew soon gathered around as Sophia zoomed in on the cameras, each of them staring at the image of the Martian surface, some in silence, others exchanging glances filled with a mixture of excitement, fear, and disbelief. It was hard to grasp the enormity of what they were about to do. For each of them, Mars had been a dream, a goal that seemed impossible. And now, that dream was finally within reach. Over the following days, the crew shifted their focus from the overwhelming expanse of deep space to the immediate task at hand, preparing for the landing. The ship's systems were checked and rechecked. Each crew member had their own role to play in the final stages of the journey. The scientific instruments needed to be calibrated, the lander's descent path confirmed, and the spacecraft's communication systems tested to ensure they could transmit a clear signal back to Earth. Despite the progress, there was an underlying tension. There was a great deal of uncertainty about what they would encounter once they reached the Martian surface. While the scientists had gathered mountains of data about the planet's composition and atmosphere, no one really knew what the landing would be like. Would the starship's thrusters be powerful enough to slow their descent? Would the dust storms that Mars was known for interfere with their approach? There were countless variables to account for. As the days passed and the spacecraft inched closer to the Martian atmosphere, the pressure mounted. The crew continued to work tirelessly, testing and recalibrating, but there was little time left to do much else. Time had run out, and the moment to make history was approaching faster than any of them had anticipated. James gathered the crew in the command center, his face stern as he looked at each of them. He could see the strain in their eyes, the same strain that he was feeling. They were exhausted, mentally and physically. It had been months since they had left Earth, and they hadn't seen anyone besides each other for all that time. The journey had been long, the challenges many, and the landing was only hours away. The pressure was unlike anything any of them had ever experienced. "All right, listen up," James said, his voice calm but carrying a weight of authority. "We've come a long way, but we're not there yet. We've got a job to do, and I know you're all up to it. I need everyone focused. The descent will be tricky. We've all trained for this, and we know what to expect. We've got this. We're not just doing this for ourselves, we're doing it for humanity." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We're about to make history," James continued. "But we can't afford to mess this up. Let's do this." The crew nodded in agreement, each of them silently reaffirming their commitment to the mission. They were more than just astronauts, they were pioneers. And they were about to take the next giant step for humankind. The countdown to the landing began. Each crew member took their position, their eyes fixed on their screens as the spacecraft began its final descent into the Martian atmosphere. The control room was eerily quiet except for the sounds of the mission systems running in the background. The tension was palpable. James sat in his seat, his hands resting on the console in front of him. His mind was focused, but in the back of his head, he could hear the distant echo of his own doubts. What if something went wrong? What if they weren't prepared for what Mars had in store for them? But then he remembered something. He remembered the hours of training, the simulations, the countless challenges they had already overcome. He remembered the faces of the other crew members, their determination, their strength. They were ready. The ship shook slightly as it passed through Mars' thin atmosphere. The intense heat from re-entry caused friction with the ship's outer shell, but the starship's advanced heat shields held up. The spacecraft continued its descent, and as the surface of Mars grew ever closer, James allowed himself a moment of awe. They were almost there. Suddenly, a burst of static interrupted the silence. "Control, this is Commander James. We're approaching the landing zone. All systems are green. Preparing for final descent." The crew held their breath. The next few minutes would determine everything. The descent toward Mars was proving to be both exhilarating and terrifying. The starship's engines roared as it plummeted toward the red planet's surface, and the force of the descent pressed everyone back into their seats. The whole spacecraft shook violently, the sound of metal groaning reverberating throughout the cabin. There was no turning back now. 30 seconds to touchdown. James's voice echoed over the intercom, steady but with a sharp edge. Everyone held their breath. The control center was eerily silent, the crew entirely focused on the task at hand. "Check all systems. We are in the critical zone," Sophia's voice cut through the tension. Her fingers danced over the console as she checked the ship's thrusters, the landing gear, the safety measures in place. Every part of her body was in tune with the spacecraft's movements, instinctively making adjustments where necessary. The ground control team was sending their final checks from Earth, their voices crackling through the static. "Starship, you're looking good. We've got you on target. Initiate final braking thrusters. Prepare for touchdown." James, hands steady, watched the rapidly approaching surface of Mars. The reddish-brown terrain below was becoming clearer now, and he could make out the faint shadows of craters and rock formations. They were about to land on a foreign world, a world that had captivated the human imagination for centuries. Initiating final descent, Sophia said with a calmness that belied the intensity of the moment. She pulled the levers, activating the descent thrusters. The entire ship rumbled as it slowed its descent, the roar of the engines filling the air. The onboard systems chimed their approval, signaling that everything was running according to plan. But the crew knew they couldn't rely solely on technology. It was their training, their teamwork, that would get them through this final stage. As the starship neared the ground, the force of the descent increased again, and the astronauts could feel their bodies pressing back into their seats. The G-forces were intense, but they had all trained for this. Their bodies had been conditioned to endure the physical strain, and now it was time for that training to pay off. "Touchdown in T-10 seconds, James said, his voice breaking through the noise and chaos. Everyone's eyes were locked on their monitors, every muscle taut with anticipation. 5 seconds to touchdown. The countdown in the room was almost inaudible. The red dust of Mars, the surface they had been waiting to touch for months, was just moments away. Now. Sophia's voice rang out, and she slammed a final button on the console. The thrusters fired at full power, the intense heat from the rocket's flames illuminating the craft's underbelly as it braked hard against the surface of Mars. Then, a sharp jolt. The entire spacecraft lurched as the wheels hit the Martian surface. A wave of relief washed over the crew, followed by a resounding cheer. The starship had made it. They were safely on Mars. James exhaled deeply, a sense of overwhelming relief sweeping over him. They had done it. They had landed on Mars. The room was filled with a collective exhale, a moment of quiet disbelief. They were the first human beings to ever set foot on another planet. "Touchdown confirmed," he said, his voice breaking through the stunned silence. "We're on Mars. We made it." A collective cheer erupted from the crew. The sense of accomplishment was immediate, yet it felt surreal. They had been dreaming about this moment for so long, but now that it had arrived, it was difficult to comprehend. But there was no time to linger in the moment. Their mission was far from over. "All right, team, we've landed," James said, his voice steady. "Let's get to work." Sophia began immediately checking the starship's systems, ensuring everything was functioning as it should. The crew had a strict timeline to follow, and they couldn't afford any delays. The first few hours after landing were critical. They needed to set up their base camp, check for any potential hazards, and begin their scientific research. Liam, start setting up communication with Earth. Let them know we're okay, James instructed. Liam's fingers flew over his console, sending the first official transmission back home. On it, Commander. First communication to Earth going out now. While Liam worked on the communication systems, the rest of the team began their preparations to disembark. There was a palpable sense of excitement mixed with nerves. They were about to step onto the surface of Mars, a world where no human had ever been before. It was an environment that had only ever been seen from afar, and they were about to change that forever. Remember, James said as he looked at the crew, we've trained for this. We've done the simulations. We're ready. Let's take this one step at a time. Safety first, then we'll move forward. Sophia nodded, her face tight with concentration. I'll make sure the environmental systems are up and running. We can't afford to take any chances with the atmosphere here. Natalie, the mission's scientist, looked over her equipment, checking the samples they would be collecting. I'll get the first few samples from the Martian soil ready. This is why we're here, science. Ethan, the medical officer, gave a reassuring smile to the team. I'll keep an eye on everyone's health. We're in uncharted territory, but we're all well prepared. The crew moved with purpose, each member focused on their specific task. The tension of the landing was slowly dissipating, but there was still a long way to go. The crew had to establish their base camp, begin their scientific research, and ensure that the starship remained in good condition for the return journey. Finally, the time had come. James stood at the airlock, his spacesuit on and his helmet in place. The hatch to the outside world was sealed tightly. With a deep breath, he pressed a button on his suit's console, and the airlock opened. The first breath of Martian air, the closest thing to a breath of fresh air they'd had in months, hit his lungs. Here we go, James said, stepping onto the surface of Mars. The dust beneath his boots shifted as he planted his first step. He stood there for a moment, taking in the alien landscape before him, the rusty soil, the barren plains stretching out in every direction. The sky above was tinged with a faint reddish hue, with the sun far off in the distance, weaker than it had been back on Earth. The ground was cracked and uneven, with deep scars that spoke of a world in turmoil. But at that moment, it didn't matter. He was standing on Mars. They had made it. Mission accomplished, James said quietly, a smile tugging at his lips as he looked back toward the airlock. The others soon followed, each of them stepping onto the surface of the red planet, knowing that they had just changed history forever. The feeling of stepping onto the Martian surface was unlike anything any of them had experienced. For a few moments, there was only silence, no chatter, no sounds of excitement. Just the weight of the moment settling in. They had made history, but now the real challenge began, surviving on a foreign planet, light years away from home. James surveyed the vast landscape before him. Mars was an alien world, barren, cold, and seemingly endless. Yet, there was something oddly beautiful about it, something that called to him. He could feel the immense weight of their mission. Their task wasn't just about exploration, it was about establishing humanity's presence on a new world. The wind, though light, carried a dry chill across the surface, kicking up small clouds of red dust. Mars' thin atmosphere allowed for only the faintest breeze, and the planet's gravity was only about a third of Earth's. It was a strange feeling, walking on the surface, the sensation of being lighter yet grounded at the same time. The crew spread out, each member finding their place on the surface, setting up their instruments and preparing to begin their first tasks. Their objective was clear: establish a base, begin scientific research, and ensure that they were ready for any unexpected developments. The months of training, the simulations, and the countless hours spent preparing for this moment now felt like a lifetime ago. "All right, team, let's get to work," James said, his voice calm but with a sense of urgency. "Sophia, I want you to set up the communication relay with Earth. Let them know we're stable and starting our operations." Liam, start the data collection protocols, let's get our first readings from the soil. Natalie, I need you to start analyzing the atmosphere and surface composition. Ethan, check our supplies and make sure everything is in order. This is a long-term operation. We need to stay ahead of the game. Understood, Sophia replied, already pulling up the communication systems on her console. I'm sending the first update to Earth now. Liam was already preparing the equipment needed to take soil samples. His hands moved quickly but with precision as he calibrated the instruments. We'll have our first soil sample in a few minutes. I'm excited to see what we find down there. James nodded and turned to Natalie, who was already taking readings from the surrounding atmosphere using a portable analyzer. How's the air looking? Thin, she replied, her voice calm but with an underlying note of fascination. Mostly carbon dioxide, with trace amounts of nitrogen and argon. Nothing too surprising, but it's a good sign that the planet's composition is as expected. No major deviations from what we've studied. Good, James said. We're not here for easy answers. We came here for discovery, and Mars has a lot to teach us. Let's make sure we're collecting everything we can. Ethan, the medical officer, was already scanning the crew's vitals and the status of their spacesuits. Vitals are good. Oxygen levels are stable. Everything's functioning properly, but I'll continue monitoring. We need to be prepared for any sudden changes. The first few days are crucial, so we'll keep a close eye on things. James gave a small nod of approval. Let's keep it sharp. We're in this together. Hours passed as the crew settled into their tasks. The work was precise and methodical, but the realization of their historic achievement never truly left them. Mars was vast and still, an endless desert stretching out in every direction, with the jagged peaks of distant mountains dotting the horizon. It was a world where time seemed to stretch, where every movement, every decision, felt magnified. James glanced up at the sky. The sun, distant and pale, cast a dim light over the planet, creating long shadows across the surface. The emptiness was overwhelming, but there was also a profound sense of peace. They were the first humans to stand on this planet, the first to explore this new frontier. It was a weighty responsibility, but it was also a privilege. Nightfall on Mars was as stark as the day. The temperature plummeted rapidly, dropping to well below freezing. Mars had no real atmosphere to retain heat, and with its axial tilt similar to Earth's, the planet experienced seasons, but the nights were always brutally cold. The team had set up a temporary shelter near the lander to shield themselves from the cold and the Martian dust storms that occasionally whipped across the surface. Inside the shelter, they gathered for their first official debrief since landing. The small space was cramped but functional, outfitted with just enough supplies to keep them going for a while. It was a far cry from the luxury of Earth, but it was home, for now. Good work today, everyone, James began, looking around at the tired but satisfied faces of his crew. We've done what no one else has. This is only the beginning. But tomorrow, we go deeper. We start taking samples from the deeper layers of the soil and testing the water ice reserves we've detected below the surface. If we can find a sustainable water source, that changes everything. Sophia spoke up. I can't believe we're really here. It feels like a dream. It's not a dream, James replied. We're making history. But we have to stay focused. Tomorrow, we begin the real work. Liam leaned back in his chair, looking out the small window at the barren landscape. Can you imagine what it'll be like when we have a base here? Real life on Mars. It'll change everything. Natalie smiled, though it was a little distant. We still have a lot of work ahead of us. This is only the start. The data we gather here could pave the way for future missions. The conversation shifted as Ethan began running a check on their oxygen levels. The team continued to settle into a rhythm, but the reality of their isolation was beginning to creep in. Though they had each other, the vast emptiness of Mars was constant. It was a reminder of just how far from home they were. Even the smallest issues could turn into major problems, and the harsh conditions of the planet could be unforgiving. James stood up and walked over to the small window of their shelter. He stared out into the dark, barren landscape. It felt like the end of the world, or the beginning of something extraordinary. As the night grew colder and the shelter's lights dimmed, the crew prepared for another day of exploration. They knew the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, obstacles, and the unknown. But they also knew that they were the ones who had stepped into history, and their discoveries would shape humanity's future. They were not just surviving on Mars, they were thriving. The morning on Mars was not as quiet as James had hoped. Even though the atmosphere was thin and the sky still held the dim glow of a distant sun, there was a palpable tension in the air. The crew had been working for nearly 2 days straight, pushing their physical and mental limits, but the task before them wasn't something they could afford to rush. James knew that each moment on this foreign planet was an opportunity to learn, but it was also a reminder of just how vulnerable they were. Mars may have been barren and cold, but it was still a world that had its secrets, secrets they had come to uncover. "All right, team, gather up. We've got our work cut out for us today," James said as he looked around at his crew. They had made a good start, but there was much more to be done. They had collected their initial samples, set up their base camp, and tested the first communication systems with Earth. Now, it was time for their first major scientific mission, to investigate the ice deposits that could potentially provide a sustainable water source. Sophia was reviewing their communication logs, checking to ensure that their signals were still stable. "I've sent updates to Earth about the samples and the general status. Everything is good on that front. They're monitoring us closely." Liam had already packed the equipment for their soil tests and sample collection. He was checking the seals on the sample containers, making sure nothing was left to chance. "Ready when you are, Commander. We've got a good spot marked out for the ice sample." James nodded, then turned his attention to Natalie. She had been studying the geological surveys for the past few hours, scanning for signs of life, or at least traces of past life. "What's the latest on the surface scans?" he asked. She looked up, her eyes tired but determined. "We've detected some anomalies beneath the surface. I don't know if they're natural or something more, but the readings are unusual. There's a consistent shift in the density of the soil beneath the surface. It's unlike anything we've encountered in the simulations." A chill ran down James's spine. "What do you mean by unusual?" Natalie hesitated, her gaze narrowing as she adjusted the data on her tablet. "It's almost like there's something buried under the surface. I'm not saying it's alien, but it's definitely not natural. There's a strange signature in the scans. It could be a structural formation or something else." James frowned, looking over at the others. A sense of unease began to settle over the group, but he didn't want to raise alarm. "Let's focus on the ice for now. We'll need to collect the samples and do a deeper scan later. We can't get sidetracked by something that might not even be there." He turned to Ethan, who was standing by the medical station. "How's everyone's health?" Ethan ran his hand through his hair, looking over the vitals. "Vitals are stable for now, but we need to monitor radiation exposure more closely. Even though we're shielded, Mars's thin atmosphere still lets more radiation through than we'd like." James nodded. "Good call. Let's keep an eye on it. All right, everyone, we're heading out to the ice fields. Let's be sharp." The journey to the ice field took just under an hour by rover. The terrain was rough and uneven, with vast stretches of red rock and dust, occasionally broken up by massive craters. The rover's wheels crunched over the surface, sending small clouds of dust into the air. As they neared their destination, the team could see the icy deposits glistening faintly under the weak Martian sun. "This is it," Liam said, pointing to the distance. "We're close." Sophia peered out the window of the rover, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The ice seemed almost to shimmer, but there was something about it that didn't look quite right. The deposits were large, but there was an odd pattern to the way they spread across the surface. Almost unnatural. Does that look like water ice to you, Natalie? James asked, trying to keep the tone light, even as he felt an unsettling sense of caution in the pit of his stomach. Natalie squinted at the horizon. It could be, but something's off. The pattern isn't random, it's almost like it's been arranged. I'll need to take a closer look. The rover pulled up to the site, and the crew climbed out, their boots sinking slightly into the loose Martian soil. As they approached the ice deposits, the strange patterns became more apparent. The ice wasn't just randomly scattered, it had a geometric arrangement, as though it had been placed intentionally, but by whom? Or what? This doesn't look natural, Sophia murmured, her voice tight. She crouched down to examine the ice closer, her fingers brushing the surface. The coldness radiated from it, but there was something unnerving about the way it was arranged. James stepped forward, his boots crunching the dust underfoot. Keep your focus, everyone. This could be something very important. We're here to collect data, not speculate. Let's do our job. The team went to work, but the unease lingered. Natalie started scanning the surrounding area, taking soil samples and running diagnostics on the ice itself. Liam began extracting the ice, carefully placing it into storage containers. As the team worked, James kept his gaze on the surrounding landscape. The icy deposit seemed to stretch further than he had expected, with more unnatural geometric shapes emerging from the dust. "All right, James," Liam called out, his voice laced with curiosity. "I've got the first batch of ice samples. But there's something strange going on with the structure here. You need to come see this." James walked over to where Liam was standing, looking down at the ice. The pattern in which the ice had been placed had become more evident as the ice was pulled away. It was almost as though something, had deliberately arranged these frozen blocks in a pattern. James's heart skipped a beat. "This isn't just ice," he said slowly. "These are markers, signs of intelligence." Natalie joined them, her expression serious. "This is not natural. I've run the scans. The ice is layered in a way that shouldn't be possible in the Martian climate. It's almost like it's been artificially preserved." A creeping sense of dread settled over James. He had come to Mars hoping for answers about its potential for human habitation, but now he was facing something far more complex, something that could change everything. "What are we looking at?" Sophia asked quietly. "If someone, or something, put this here, what does it mean?" James turned toward the team. The unease in the air was palpable. For the first time since landing, he realized that Mars might not just be a planet for exploration. It might be a place where humanity's history, and its future, would be rewritten. But what they had discovered beneath the ice was just the tip of the iceberg. The discovery of the mysterious ice formations shook the crew. For the first time since landing on Mars, they weren't sure what to believe. What they had thought would be a straightforward mission to gather resources and data was quickly turning into a deep, unsettling mystery. Could these ice formations be evidence of a past civilization? And if so, what had happened to them? James paced in their temporary shelter, the walls still buzzing with the hum of the life support systems. His mind raced. They had come to Mars expecting challenges, harsh conditions, technical failures, and the weight of isolation. But this was something else entirely. He was snapped from his thoughts by Sophia's voice over the comms. "James, you need to see this. The ice we brought back isn't just frozen water. It's something more." He quickly grabbed his helmet and made his way to the lab area. The crew had returned with the ice samples, and they had begun running preliminary tests. As he entered, he saw Sophia hunched over one of the sample containers, her brow furrowed in concentration. "James, look at this," she said, her voice shaky. She pointed to the readings on her screen. "This isn't just water ice. It contains a series of trace elements that shouldn't be here. There's carbon, oxygen, even some silicon. But it's not just a mixture of compounds, it's something more complex." James leaned over her shoulder, examining the data. His gut tightened. "You're saying this ice could be engineered?" Sophia nodded, clearly unsettled. "I don't know, James. But whatever it is, it's not natural. The ratio of elements doesn't match anything we know from Mars or any other planet in our solar system. It's almost as if someone, or something, deliberately added these elements." James stood up, his mind spinning. "I need to know more. We can't ignore this. We have to dig deeper." He turned to Natalie, who had been busy analyzing the geological readings from the surface. "How's the scan of the surrounding area going? Any signs of other formations like this?" Natalie looked up from her tablet, her eyes wide with disbelief. "It's strange, but the scan shows more, scattered around the area, there are pockets of the same anomaly. Almost like there's a larger network of these ice structures beneath the surface. Could this be part of a larger pattern?" Liam asked, who had joined them in the lab. "A civilization or technology we don't understand yet?" James paused, weighing the possibilities. "We're dealing with something here that's far beyond our initial scope. But we need to be careful. We don't know if we're dealing with something from the past or if something's still down there." A silence hung in the room, the weight of the uncertainty settling on everyone. The team decided to proceed cautiously. They knew that their primary mission was to gather data on Mars's habitability, but now they faced an entirely different reality. Could there have been a civilization here before? Could they be looking at something that could change humanity's understanding of life beyond Earth? Over the next few hours, they set up a series of deeper scans and drilling operations in the area where the ice had been found. The tension in the air was palpable as the rover approached the site. No one spoke much, they were all too focused on the task at hand. Every movement was calculated, every scan was run multiple times to ensure they weren't missing anything. When they arrived, James could feel his heart rate quicken. The area was eerily silent, save for the soft hum of their equipment. As they set up the drill to break into the crust beneath the ice, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something far more significant than they had anticipated. The harsh Martian winds whipped around them, but there was an unnatural stillness to the air today. "Ready to drill?" Liam asked, voice tight. James gave a short nod. "Let's proceed. We need to know what's underneath." The drill bit into the surface, and the sounds echoed in the otherwise still environment. As the crew worked, the tension between them grew. Each beep and whir of the equipment added to the anticipation. The drill hit something hard, far harder than they had expected. "This is unusual," Natalie said, her voice tense as she adjusted the readings. "It's almost like there's something solid beneath this layer. It's not just ice or rock." James stared at the monitor. "What do you mean?" "I'm getting metallic signatures," Natalie replied. "It could be a natural mineral deposit, but I'm not convinced. This feels intentional." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had already found something strange with the ice. Could this be more evidence that Mars wasn't just a barren wasteland? "Let's get deeper. We're not stopping until we find out what's below," James ordered, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Liam adjusted the settings on the drill, pushing it deeper into the surface. The deeper they went, the stronger the metallic signature became. After what felt like an eternity, the drill finally broke through to something else, something unexpected. There was a loud grinding noise, and suddenly, the drill stopped. "James, something's wrong." "The drill's stuck," Liam said, his voice taut. "It's like there's a barrier we can't penetrate." "Pull it back," James ordered immediately. "Don't force it. We'll have to analyze what we're dealing with before we go any further." The team gathered around the drill site, looking at the strange readings. The metallic barrier beneath the surface wasn't just rock or ice, it was something far more complex. James felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Whatever lay beneath this planet was not random. It wasn't just nature. "This is it," James murmured. "We've found something. What do you think it is? Sophia asked, her voice almost a whisper. I don't know, James admitted. But I think Mars has secrets, secrets we're not prepared for. As the crew made their way back to the shelter, the weight of what they had discovered pressed down on them. They were no longer just explorers. They were uncovering a mystery that might hold the key to humanity's future, and perhaps the history of Mars itself. James sat alone for a while, staring out into the red expanse. There were still so many questions left unanswered, and the road ahead was more uncertain than ever. They had come to Mars to search for life, but now they were faced with something much larger, something that could change everything. As the days stretched on, the weight of their discoveries continued to grow heavier. Every scan, every test, seemed to only deepen the mystery. The metallic layer they had uncovered beneath the Martian surface was far more complex than anything they had expected. The silence of Mars, once a calming reminder of their isolation, now felt oppressive. The crew was on edge, their once clear mission now overshadowed by the unknown. James had never been one to shy away from difficult challenges, but this was something else. They had expected to find answers about Mars's potential for human life. Instead, they had found something far darker, a mystery that seemed to beckon them deeper into its secrets, urging them to explore further, but also warning them to turn back. He stood in the command center, watching the latest scans on the screen. Natalie had been hard at work trying to analyze the metallic layer they had encountered. Her findings were troubling. James, you need to see this, she called out. Her voice was more serious than he had heard it in days, laced with a mixture of awe and fear. James walked over, his boots clicking softly against the metal floor. Natalie handed him the tablet with the data she had compiled. What are we looking at? James asked, already bracing himself for more unsettling news. Natalie's finger hovered over the screen, tracing the anomaly. This metallic layer isn't just metal, James. I ran a detailed analysis, and I found traces of something else. The composition is unusual, but more than that, it's acting like a signal. I believe it's transmitting something, a signal we haven't been able to decode yet. James's brow furrowed. A signal? From where? From underneath the surface, Natalie replied, her eyes wide. It's faint, but it's there. Almost like a dormant system, waiting to be activated. A chill ran down James's spine. They had been so focused on the physical properties of Mars, on the idea that they could establish a future for humanity here, that they hadn't considered the possibility of something else. Something intelligent. Can you isolate it? James asked, his voice low. I've tried. But it's encrypted, in a way. The patterns don't match anything we've seen. It's like the signal is intentionally hiding its origin. It's too complex, almost like a language. James took a deep breath, processing the information. So, you're telling me there's some sort of hidden system buried beneath us, and it's trying to communicate? I think so, Natalie said, nodding. And the more I analyze it, the more I believe that this signal is a warning of some kind. The word warning lingered in the air, making the room feel smaller, more claustrophobic. James leaned against the table, his mind racing. A warning about what? I don't know, she admitted. But I'm going to keep digging. If this is a message from the past, it could be the key to understanding everything. The crew decided to press forward. The thought of leaving Mars now, abandoning the mission, wasn't an option for James. They had come so far, and yet the feeling that something important, something dangerous, was buried here haunted him. But they needed answers. They couldn't stop now. Over the next few days, the team worked around the clock, trying to decode the signal beneath the surface. They had set up more sensors around the drill site, hoping to catch a more defined pattern or maybe even direct communication. It was Sophia who first noticed something strange. James, look at this. The signal, it's changing. It's getting stronger, almost like it's responding to us. James's stomach dropped. What do you mean, responding? Sophia pointed to the screen, where the signal frequency was fluctuating wildly. Look at the pattern here. It's almost like it's trying to match the frequency of our equipment. Do you think it's alive? Liam asked, his voice shaky. I mean, do you think we're dealing with something that could be aware? James glanced at the others, trying to keep his thoughts steady. It was an impossible question. I don't know. But it's not something we can ignore. After several hours of intense work, Natalie finally managed to isolate a portion of the signal. It was fragmented, broken up into pieces, but there was something unmistakable about it. It's a message, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's not in any language we know. It's coded, like an algorithm. But it's too structured to be random. The crew huddled around the monitor, the tension thick in the air. What they were seeing was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was as though someone, or something, had left a message, a warning, buried beneath the Martian surface. But what did it mean? James didn't want to entertain the thought, but the possibility gnawed at him. Could this be evidence of an ancient civilization? A culture that had once thrived here, only to be wiped out for reasons they still didn't understand? And if so, was this a message from the past, an echo left behind, trying to reach them from across the void of time? The thoughts were too much. He had to refocus. We need to decode this, James said. If there's a message here, we need to understand it. We can't leave any stone unturned. Natalie nodded, her eyes focused on the screen. I'll get to work on it right away. But I think this is just the beginning. The signal is only part of the story. There's something else, something hidden in the deeper layers beneath us. James glanced at the others, his heart racing. They were on the brink of something monumental, something that could change everything. But there was no going back now. Whatever this was, whatever they had uncovered, it wasn't just a scientific discovery. It was a warning. As they continued their efforts to decode the signal, James couldn't help but wonder, what if this was a warning about something more than just the past? The very thought sent a shiver down his spine. The crew had been so focused on the promise of discovery, but now they were faced with something far more ominous. Whatever lay beneath Mars was more than just a relic of the past. It was a message. A message that, if they didn't understand it soon, could have dangerous consequences for them all. The days since the discovery of the signal had been nothing short of a whirlwind. The crew had spent hours, even days, poring over the data, trying to make sense of the strange, encoded message they had uncovered beneath the Martian surface. Each passing hour only deepened the mystery, and the once clear skies of Mars now seemed to close in on them, heavy with the weight of what they had found. James could barely sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind would race with the possibilities. What if this message wasn't just a relic of the past? What if it was a warning, one that could determine the fate of their mission? And more pressing, what if it wasn't just a warning for them, but for humanity as a whole? He sat alone in the command center, staring at the screen where the fragmented signal still danced, waiting for them to decode it. The cracks in the data were starting to show signs of a more complex pattern, almost like a map. Or perhaps something more intentional. But the pieces didn't align with anything he had seen before. The message was like a puzzle, each section cryptic and unsettling, leaving him with more questions than answers. James, we've got something, Natalie's voice broke through his thoughts. James leaned forward, the weariness in his bones momentarily forgotten. What is it? We've isolated a part of the signal, she said, her voice carrying a tone of both excitement and unease. It's not complete, but we're getting a coherent phrase. It's alarming. James's pulse quickened. He had known they were getting close, but now that they had something concrete, something that might reveal more of the truth, he wasn't sure he was ready for it. He stood and hurried over to the screen where Natalie was working. The others had gathered around, their faces etched with tension. We've done everything we can to clean it up, Natalie said. And what we've found is this. She pressed a key, and a set of words flashed across the screen. James's breath caught in his throat. Beneath the ice. The sleeper. What did it mean? Wait, Liam said, speaking up for the first time in hours. This could be a reference to the ice formations we found. You think something's buried under the surface? Something is alive? It's a possibility, Sophia said, her voice tight with apprehension. But it's still too early to draw any conclusions. The message could mean a lot of things. But what if it's not just a message? What if it's something more? James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at the others, all of them wide-eyed and tense, and then turned back to the screen. What if this is a warning? I think that's what it is, Natalie said, her tone resolute. I believe we've uncovered something here, a dormant system, waiting to be activated. And it's been waiting for a long time. Then we need to figure out how to stop it from waking up, James said, his voice growing more urgent. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to stay calm. If we're right, this could change everything. We could be dealing with something beyond our comprehension, something that's been buried for centuries, maybe millennia. We need to go deeper, Liam added, his voice grim. If it's beneath the ice, we have to find a way to dig it up, to understand what we're dealing with before it's too late. James shook his head. We don't even know if it's dangerous. What if it's just a system from an ancient civilization? A piece of history we're not meant to disturb? I don't think it's just history, Sophia said. Not anymore. The signal, it feels like a warning. And we're not the only ones hearing it. Whatever's down there, it's starting to wake up. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. James's stomach tightened. If the message was correct, if something was really waiting beneath the ice, then what would it do when it woke up? The decision to explore the area further wasn't an easy one, but it was inevitable. There was too much at stake now. James gathered the crew in their briefing room to discuss their next steps. Everyone had their own theories, their own fears, but the mission had always been about discovery. And now, the discovery had taken a terrifying turn. We need to move quickly, James said, pacing in front of the crew. We've isolated the signal, but we still don't know the full extent of what we're dealing with. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but we can't ignore the possibility that there's something active under the ice. Natalie spoke up. We're going to need more equipment. The drills we've been using won't cut it. If there's something complex buried there, we'll need to dig deeper and faster. Are we ready for that? Liam asked. If this thing wakes up, we could be dealing with something dangerous. We need to be prepared. We have no choice, James said, his voice firm. We'll take every precaution, but we need to know what's under that ice. We've come this far. We can't stop now. As the team prepared to move out, a new sense of urgency filled the air. They were no longer just explorers, they were about to confront something far greater than they had anticipated. The thrill of discovery had been replaced by a deep unease, a sense that they were on the verge of something that could reshape their understanding of the universe, or doom them all. As they set out to dig deeper, the weight of the situation bore down on them. The once clear skies of Mars, usually a comforting constant, now felt suffocating. The wind whipped through their suits, but it did little to ease the tension that gripped them. They were walking into the unknown. James felt a knot tighten in his chest as he watched the team work. Each step, each movement, felt like it carried the weight of the unknown. What if they weren't ready for whatever lay beneath? What if the message was just the beginning of something far worse? But there was no turning back. They were committed now. And as the drilling equipment roared to life, they had only one option left, to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The deeper they drilled, the more the signal intensified. It wasn't just faint bursts anymore, it was a steady hum, almost like the pulse of a heart. As the drill bit into the Martian crust, James's heart pounded in his chest. Was this it? Were they about to uncover the sleeper beneath the ice? With each passing moment, the pressure mounted. The team continued to work in silence, only the hum of the drill and the occasional exchange of words breaking the stillness. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and James couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient, was stirring. The hum of the drill was deafening, almost as if it were a heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, and relentless. Each turn of the drill bit into the frozen Martian ground felt like a countdown, a quiet but inevitable approach to something they could not yet comprehend. James stood beside the control panel, his eyes glued to the display, watching as the readings from their sensors fluctuated wildly. The signal they had been chasing was no longer just a cryptic message. It was growing stronger with every meter they drilled. The metallic hum that had once been faint was now unmistakable, reverberating through the station as if the very core of Mars was responding to their intrusion. "We're getting closer," Natalie said, her voice sharp with both determination and concern. She was at her station, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she continued to monitor the signals. "The frequency is intensifying. If we don't stop, we could risk activating whatever is down there." James felt a chill run through him at the words. They had come so far, and now, as they were inches away from their discovery, the weight of their actions hit him like a wave. Were they truly ready for whatever they were about to find? Had they pushed too far? "I think we need to pull back," Liam said, looking over at James. His voice was laced with concern. "If this thing really is alive, or if it's a weapon, we could be making a huge mistake." "I agree," Sophia added, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the data. "We don't know enough about what's beneath us. For all we know, we could be triggering something catastrophic." James knew they were right. But the pull of the unknown was powerful. The team had come so far. To leave now, with everything they had discovered, felt like admitting defeat. "We're too close to turn back now," James said, his voice quiet but firm. "We need to finish what we started. We've already made history with this discovery. Now, we have to see it through. Whatever we find, we will be prepared." The silence in the room was palpable, the crew all exchanging wary looks. No one seemed fully convinced, but there was no arguing with James's decision. They had come this far, and there was no stopping now. The drill finally reached its destination, a thick, metallic layer beneath the ice that had been undisturbed for millennia. It was a sight unlike any of them had ever seen before, a flawless sheet of metal, its surface smooth and unnaturally perfect, as though it had been designed by an intelligence far beyond their understanding. That's not natural," Liam said, his voice trembling. It's a structure. It's something built." James felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He hadn't wanted to admit it, but Liam was right. This wasn't just an ancient relic of the past. This was a construction, an object, crafted by someone or something. And the signal, now clearer than ever, seemed to be coming from within it. Natalie ran her hand over the console, her fingers still moving swiftly as she attempted to decipher the readings. "The signal is coming from within this metallic layer," she said, voice tight. "We have to breach it. But it's going to take time. This material is unlike anything we've encountered." James stood still for a moment, the weight of their discovery settling in. "Can we open it?" Natalie's eyes flicked to him. "It's going to be tricky. But if we use the right tools, we can make a breach." Without waiting for further discussion, James gave the order. "Let's do it." The crew worked tirelessly, the sound of the machinery punctuating the silence. Each slice into the metal felt like they were unlocking something ancient, something long forgotten by time. They worked with precision, their movements carefully coordinated, knowing that each step brought them closer to revealing the truth. It wasn't long before they hit something unexpected, a faint, low hum emanating from within the metal. It wasn't just the sound of machinery, but something else, something alive. The hairs on the back of James's neck stood on end. They were no longer dealing with a simple artifact from the past. They were dealing with something far more dangerous. It's reacting to our tools," Sophia said, stepping back in alarm. "The signal's changing. It's as if it's responding. James's heart pounded. We've got to be careful. Whatever this thing is, it knows we're here. And then, with a soft hiss, the metal layer gave way. It was as though the structure had been waiting for them, patiently enduring their intrusion. The breach was small but enough to reveal what lay beneath. What they found was more shocking than anything they could have imagined. Inside the metallic casing was a chamber, perfectly sealed, yet somehow still alive with an eerie, pulsating glow. At the center of the chamber lay a large, cylindrical object, its surface smooth and glistening. It was clear that this object wasn't of natural origin. It was artificial, crafted by an intelligence far beyond anything humanity had ever known. The moment the breach was made, the signal intensified, and the crew felt the ground beneath them shift, as though Mars itself was waking up in response to the disturbance. Natalie's hands trembled as she pulled up the first set of scans. It's an energy source. But not anything we've ever seen before. She paused, her voice shaking, it's like nothing I can describe. It's almost like it's a living energy. James stepped forward, the full weight of what they had uncovered settling in. We've uncovered something far greater than we could have imagined. This isn't just a message from the past. This is a system, an entity. He glanced at the team, his mind racing. We need to study it carefully. This is the most important discovery in human history, but we must tread lightly. We don't know what this thing can do. But as they stared at the object, they all felt it, a growing sense of unease, as though whatever they had disturbed was more than just an ancient artifact. It was something alive, something powerful. And it had been waiting. Do you think it could be a weapon? Liam asked, his voice low and uncertain. I don't know, James said, his eyes fixed on the glowing object. But whatever it is, it's not dormant anymore. It's awake. The silence in the room grew heavy as the crew considered the implications of their discovery. Had they just uncovered a relic from a past civilization, or had they unleashed something far more dangerous, something that had been dormant for centuries? As they continued to study the object, the pulse of energy grew stronger, reverberating through the room. The air seemed to thicken, and James couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. The discovery of the mysterious object beneath the Martian ice had set off a chain of events no one could have foreseen. The crew, initially filled with curiosity and excitement, now found themselves gripped by fear and uncertainty. They had unearthed something that went beyond their wildest dreams, or nightmares. The object, a smooth, pulsating cylinder, seemed to be alive, emitting an energy that was unlike anything they had ever encountered. And the signal, it was as though it had been waiting for them, guiding them toward this moment. James paced back and forth in the command center, his mind racing. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. They had woken something from its ancient slumber, and the question on everyone's mind was simple: what next? So, what now? Sophia asked, her voice strained. She sat at one of the consoles, her fingers hovering over the keys but not daring to type. We've opened the chamber, and whatever this thing is, it's reacting. But we don't know what it wants, or if it even can want anything. James stopped pacing and turned toward her, his face pale but determined. We need to study it. We've come too far to turn back now. But what if we're making a mistake? Liam asked, his voice tight. What if we're just triggering something that we can't control? You saw the way the energy spiked. What if it's not just dormant? What if it's a weapon, or worse, a sentient entity? James hesitated, the weight of Liam's words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. He had considered the possibility. Deep down, he knew the risks. But the urge to understand, to know what they had uncovered, was far too powerful to ignore. We can't make assumptions, he said, trying to steady his nerves. We need data. If this thing is a threat, we need to know how to neutralize it. But if it's something else, something we don't understand, we need to be ready. Ready for what? Liam asked, raising an eyebrow. Ready for it to attack. Or ready to study it and risk our lives. Enough, Natalie cut in, her voice sharp. We need to be objective. This is not about fear, it's about discovery. We have to approach this scientifically. There's no point in speculating. We need to get a closer look at the object, examine the readings, and determine its properties. We can't afford to panic. James nodded in agreement, though a part of him still churned with doubt. Natalie was right. They were explorers, after all. And every great discovery in history had come with risks. But none of them had come with stakes this high. They weren't just uncovering a piece of the past, they were uncovering something that could alter the course of humanity's future. The team gathered around the console as Natalie fed the most recent data into the system. The signal they had been tracking was now more consistent, but with each passing second, the hum grew louder and more intense. The energy reading spiked, pulsing like a heartbeat in sync with their growing tension. It's definitely responding, Sophia murmured, her eyes scanning the screen. It's not just a passive artifact. It's reacting to our presence in ways we don't fully understand. James leaned over her shoulder. Can we get a visual scan? I need to see more, what's inside the object. Natalie quickly worked the console, pulling up the scans of the object's interior. What they saw sent a chill down their spines. The cylindrical shape of the object was flawless, no imperfections, no seams. But within it, glowing lines of energy seemed to snake through its core like a neural network, pulsing and shifting with an unnatural rhythm. It looked alive. It wasn't just an energy source or a device, it was a sentient presence, a system of intelligence. It's not just energy, Liam said, his voice low. There's a pattern to this. It's communicating. Communicating? James repeated, his brow furrowing. With us? I'm not sure, Liam replied, his eyes fixed on the screen. But whatever it is, it's aware of us. And it's been waiting for something. The room fell into silence. The realization that they were dealing with an intelligence of unknown origin, something that had been dormant for millennia, hit them all like a wave. This wasn't just a scientific discovery. This was a first contact scenario. James stood at the center of the room, his mind racing. The crew was right, whatever this object was, it wasn't a relic of an ancient civilization. It was something else entirely. And the question that loomed over them all was whether they could handle what came next. He walked toward the object, the pulsating glow casting long shadows on the walls of the chamber. There, in the center, was a series of intricate symbols etched into the surface of the cylinder. They were unlike any language he had ever seen before, alien, ancient, and incomprehensible. But the signal was almost like it was trying to interpret these symbols for them, giving them a key to unlock its meaning. What are you trying to tell us? James muttered, almost as if speaking directly to the object. But he wasn't sure if the words meant anything at all. Was it a warning? A message? Or something more? Suddenly, the room around him shifted. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop, like time itself had frozen. And then, without warning, the object shifted. Its surface rippled as though the material was alive. The hum grew deafening, the energy expanding outward in a shockwave that rattled the walls of the station. Get back! Natalie shouted, pushing everyone away from the object. The shockwave passed over them, and for a moment, everything went dark. The screens flickered, and the lights dimmed. The crew stood frozen, hearts racing, unsure of what had just happened. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the pulse stopped. The room fell into an eerie silence. James felt his chest tighten. What was that? Sophia was the first to speak. I think it just activated. Whatever it is, it's awake. They all stood in stunned silence, the gravity of the moment sinking in. They had woken it. And now, whatever it was fully aware of them. "We need to move," James said, his voice hoarse. "We need to gather all the data we can before this thing does something else. We can't afford to wait any longer. We're too deep into this. What if it's already too late?" Liam whispered, his face pale. "What if waking it was the worst thing we could have done?" James turned toward him, his expression grim. "We don't have a choice now. But we have to be ready for whatever comes next. We're not alone down here, and whatever that thing is, it's part of something much bigger." Natalie nodded, her expression focused. "Agreed. We move now, gather data, and be ready for whatever this thing throws at us." The crew quickly set to work, each of them aware that the next few hours, or even minutes, could change everything. They had awakened something far beyond their comprehension, and now they had to face the consequences. As they scrambled to collect data and prepare for the unknown, James couldn't help but wonder, what had they really uncovered on Mars? Was it a weapon? A gift? Or something far worse? He couldn't shake the feeling that they had just unlocked a door they were never meant to open. And now, it was only a matter of time before they would find out exactly what lay on the other side. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?